The humid Georgia evening clung to Maria Cruz's skin as she stepped off the city bus at the wrought iron gates of the Whitman estate. Her worn canvas bag held a change of clothes, her grandmother's rosary, and a crumpled job offer that felt too good to be true. The mansion before her gleamed like something from a magazine, all white columns and manicured gardens that seemed to stretch forever under the Spanish moss. "You're late," snapped a sharp voice behind her. Maria turned to see a tall woman in an expensive cream-colored suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe chignon. Everything about her screamed money and authority, from her pearl earrings to her perfectly manicured nails that she drummed impatiently against her tablet. "I'm sorry, Miss Veronica Hale, Mr. Whitman's fiancée and the person who will decide whether you keep this job." Veronica's ice-blue eyes swept over Maria's simple black dress and comfortable shoes with obvious disdain. "Follow me." And try to keep up. The interior of the mansion was even more breathtaking than the exterior. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors, and oil paintings in gilded frames lined the walls. Maria's reflection in the polished surfaces looked small and out of place, like a smudge on perfection. "The previous maid was unreliable," Veronica said, as she led Maria through room after room of luxury. "Mr. Whitman requires constant care, and I won't tolerate any mistakes. You'll work the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. 7 days a week. Your duties include maintaining his medical equipment, administering his medications, and keeping his rooms spotless." They stopped before a heavy oak door on the second floor. Veronica's hand rested on the brass handle, and for a moment her composed mask slipped, revealing something Maria couldn't quite identify: frustration, fear. "One more thing," Veronica said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Mr. Whitman is in a coma. He's been unresponsive for 8 months. The doctors say—" She paused, collecting herself. "The doctors say there's little hope, but we continue to provide the best care money can buy." The door opened to reveal a spacious bedroom, bathed in the soft glow of medical monitors. In the center, surrounded by tubes and machines, lay a man who couldn't have been much older than 35. Even unconscious, Charles Whitman possessed a strong jaw and kind features. That spoke of someone who had once been vibrant and alive. "Don't get attached," Veronica warned. "He's not coming back." Alone with Charles for the first time, Maria approached his bedside slowly. The steady beep of his heart monitor filled the silence, and she found herself studying his face. There was something peaceful about him, despite all the medical equipment. She thought of her own struggles, her grandmother Elena's mounting medical bills, her younger brother Diego's dreams of college that seemed further away each day, the 2 jobs she juggled just to keep their small apartment in the old part of Savannah. "Hello, Mr. Whitman," she whispered, testing the words in the quiet room. "My name is Maria. I'm going to take care of you now." She spent the first hour familiarizing herself with his routine, checking his vitals, adjusting his position to prevent bed sores, ensuring his feeding tube was functioning properly. The night nurse had left detailed instructions, but Maria found herself adding small touches of her own. She straightened the family photo on his nightstand, a picture of Charles with an older woman who shared his gentle eyes, and opened the window slightly to let in the night breeze. As dawn approached, exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders. It had been 16 hours since she'd left her day job at the downtown diner, and the familiar ache in her feet reminded her of the long shift ahead. She settled into the chair beside Charles's bed to chart his vitals one final time before the day nurse arrived. That's when it happened. A single tear, born of weariness and the overwhelming responsibility of caring for someone so vulnerable, slipped down her cheek and fell onto his forehead. For just a moment, so brief she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it, his fingers seemed to twitch. Maria leaned forward, her heart racing. "Mr. Whitman, can you hear me?" But his face remained peaceful, unchanged. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, and she realized her exhaustion was playing tricks on her. Still, something felt different in the room, as if the very air had shifted. "Good morning, Maria." The day nurse, Mrs. Patterson, bustled in with characteristic efficiency. "How was your first night?" "Quiet," Maria replied, gathering her things. But as she glanced back at Charles one more time, she could have sworn she saw the faintest smile touching the corners of his mouth. The morning sun painted Savannah's historic district in golden hues as Maria walked to the bus stop. Despite her exhaustion, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. This job would change everything for her family. She could already picture Diego's face when she told him college might be possible after all. By the way, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which city or state you're in as we follow Maria's journey together. Back at the mansion, Veronica stood at Charles's bedside, her manicured fingers drumming against the medical chart. The day nurse had mentioned nothing unusual, but something felt off. She studied Charles's face intently, searching for any sign of change. Still nothing, she murmured to herself, but her voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. If you enjoy emotional stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what happens next in Maria's journey. 3 weeks into the job, Maria had fallen into a rhythm that felt almost natural. She arrived each evening as the last tour groups departed from Savannah's historic squares, traded her diner uniform for scrubs, and settled into what had become her sanctuary, Charles's room. Tonight, however, something was different. "You're getting too comfortable," Veronica's voice cut through the evening quiet as Maria adjusted Charles's pillows. "This isn't your home, and he isn't your patient. Your hired help, nothing more." Maria looked up from where she was gently massaging Charles's hands, something the physical therapist had shown her to maintain circulation. "I'm sorry if I overstepped, Miss Hale. I just thought—" "You're not paid to think." Veronica moved closer, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "You're paid to follow instructions. Nothing more, nothing less." But even as Veronica spoke, Maria noticed something that made her pulse quicken. When she touched Charles's hand, his breathing had changed, deepened as if he was relaxing into a more natural sleep rather than the artificial stillness of his coma. "Has he shown any signs of improvement?" Maria asked carefully. Veronica's jaw tightened. "The doctors have been very clear about his prognosis. Brain trauma of this severity rarely reverses itself. We're simply maintaining his comfort until—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. After Veronica left, Maria returned to her routine, but she found herself watching Charles more carefully. Over the past weeks, she'd begun talking to him during the quiet midnight hours, sharing stories about her grandmother's cooking, Diego's basketball games, the characters she met at the diner. Tonight, she decided to try something different. "You know, Mr. Whitman, I found something interesting in your desk drawer yesterday while dusting." She pulled out a worn sheet of music, a handwritten lullaby with notes in the margins. "It says, 'For Sarah' at the top. Is that your sister in the photograph?" As she hummed the melody softly, something extraordinary happened. Charles's heart rate, displayed in green numbers on the monitor, began to slow to a more restful rhythm. His face, usually marked by the tension that even comatose patients carry, seemed to soften. Maria's breath caught in her throat. "You can hear me, can't you?" She reached for his hand again, and this time there was no mistaking it. His fingers moved, just barely, but definitely responding to her touch. "Charles," she whispered, using his first name for the first time. "If you can hear me, squeeze my hand." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, so gently she almost missed it, she felt pressure against her palm. Tears sprang to her eyes. "Oh my God, you're in there." The next several hours passed in a blur of careful observation and whispered encouragement. Maria documented every small change, the way his breathing deepened when she sang, how his heart rate stabilized when she held his hand, the almost imperceptible movement of his eyes beneath closed lids when she read aloud from the book on his nightstand. As dawn approached, she faced a dilemma. Should she tell someone? The rational part of her mind said yes. This was a medical breakthrough that his doctors needed to know about. But something held her back, the way Veronica had reacted to her. Simple questions, the barely concealed frustration in the woman's voice when she spoke about Charles's condition. Mrs. Patterson arrived for the morning shift, cheerful as always. "Good morning, dear. How's our patient today?" Maria hesitated, then made a decision that would change everything. The same. No changes to report. But as she gathered her things to leave, she made a promise to the still figure in the bed. "I'll be back tonight, Charles, and tomorrow night, and every night. Until you're ready to come back to us completely." What Maria didn't know was that Veronica had been listening from the hallway, her face growing paler with each word she overheard. As soon as Maria left, she rushed into the room, studying Charles's face with newfound urgency. "This can't be happening," she muttered, checking his chart, adjusting his medication levels. Not now. Not when everything is finally falling into place. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Dr. Morrison? It's Veronica Hale. I need to see you about Charles's case today. Yes, I know it's urgent. That evening, Maria returned to find Dr. Morrison in Charles's room. A tall man with silver hair and tired eyes who had been Charles's primary physician since the accident. Miss Cruz, isn't it? He looked up from his examination. Miss Hale tells me you've been very attentive to Mr. Whitman's care. I try my best, Doctor. She also mentioned you might be overstepping your boundaries, getting emotionally involved with a patient. His tone was gentle but firm. I understand the impulse, especially with long-term care patients, but it's important to maintain professional distance. False hope can be cruel, both for the caregiver and the patient's family. Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks. I would never do anything to harm Mr. Whitman. Of course not, Dr. Morrison said, but she could see Veronica's satisfied smile reflected in the window behind him. Just remember that your role here is to provide physical care, nothing more. These patients can seem to respond to stimuli, but it's usually just reflexive action. The brain damage in Mr. Whitman's case is quite extensive. After they left, Maria sank into her chair beside Charles's bed, feeling suddenly isolated and uncertain. Had she imagined his responses? Was she so desperate to help her family that she was seeing miracles where none existed? What do you think, Charles? She whispered to the quiet room. Am I losing my mind? This time, when his fingers moved against hers, she was certain it wasn't her imagination, and in that moment, she realized she was no longer just fighting for a job. She was fighting for a man's life and perhaps her own future as well. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as Maria settled into her usual chair beside Charles's bed. 2 months had passed since that first night when his fingers had moved, and the small improvements she witnessed each evening had become her secret treasure. Tonight, however, felt different, heavier. Earlier that day, she'd overheard Veronica on the phone in the study, her voice sharp with frustration. How much longer do we have to maintain this charade, Dr. Morrison? The insurance won't cover indefinite care, and frankly, I'm not sure I can handle much more of this emotional strain. Maria had pressed herself against the wall outside, the door her heart pounding as she listened. What about the will? Have you had a chance to review the terms with the lawyers? The conversation had chilled her. There was something cold in Veronica's tone when she spoke about Charles, something that didn't match the grief-stricken fiancée act she performed for visitors and medical staff. Now, alone with Charles in the gentle lamplight, Maria found herself studying his face more intently than ever. Over the past weeks, she'd noticed subtle changes that no one else seemed to see. The way his breathing changed when she entered the room, how his heart rate stabilized during their one-sided conversations, the almost imperceptible movement of his head when she played music from his collection. Charles, she whispered, taking his hand in both of hers, I know you're fighting to come back. I can feel it, but I'm starting to worry about what's waiting for you when you do. As if responding to her concern, his fingers tightened around hers with more strength than she'd felt before. Encouraged, she leaned closer. Can you hear me? Really hear me? She watched his face carefully. If you can understand what I'm saying, try to move your hand again. The response was immediate and unmistakable. His thumb traced a small circle against her palm. Tears welled in her eyes. Oh, Charles, how long have you been aware? How much do you remember? Over the next hour, they developed a simple communication system. 1 squeeze for yes, 2 for no. A circle traced with his thumb when he wanted her to keep talking. It was crude, but it was real communication, and Maria felt as if she was witnessing a miracle. Do you remember the accident? She asked softly. 2 squeezes. No. Are you in pain? 2 squeezes again. Do you remember Veronica? A long pause, then 1 firm squeeze. Yes. Something in the way his hand trembled when she mentioned Veronica's name sent a chill down Maria's spine. Are you afraid of her? Another pause, longer this time. Then slowly, 1 squeeze, Maria's blood ran cold. Charles, did Veronica hurt you? Is that why you can't? She stopped herself, realizing how dangerous this conversation had become. If Veronica discovered Charles was conscious, if she learned that he remembered things, we need to be careful, Maria whispered. If she finds out you're awake. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them both freeze. Maria quickly released Charles's hand and busied herself adjusting his blankets as Veronica appeared in the doorway. "Working late again, I see," Veronica said, but her voice carried a suspicious edge. "You seem very dedicated to your duties." "Mr. Whitman needed repositioning to prevent pressure sores," Maria replied, grateful that her voice remained steady. "The night nurse manual recommends—" "I'm familiar with the protocols." Veronica moved into the room, her sharp gaze taking in every detail. "Perhaps too familiar. I've been thinking that we might need to adjust your responsibilities." Maria's heart sank. "I'm sorry if my care hasn't been adequate. On the contrary, you've been almost too attentive." Veronica approached Charles's bedside, and Maria noticed how his breathing changed, becoming shallow and tense. "Dr. Morrison mentioned that you might be developing an unhealthy attachment to your patient. That's concerning. I care about all my patients. This isn't a hospital, Miss Cruz. This is a private home, and he's my fiancé, soon to be my husband if God grants us a miracle." The way she said the word miracle made it sound like a curse. "I think it might be best if we found you a different position, something more suitable to your background." The threat was clear, and Maria felt panic rising in her chest, not just for herself and her family's financial situation, but for Charles. If she left, who would advocate for him? Who would notice if his condition changed, or if something happened to him? "Please, Miss Hale, I promise I'll maintain appropriate boundaries. This job, my family depends on it." Veronica studied her for a long moment, and Maria could see the calculation in her eyes. "Very well, but I'll be watching more closely from now on. Any sign of inappropriate behavior, and you're gone, without references." After Veronica left, Maria waited a full 10 minutes before returning to Charles's side. His hand was clenched into a fist, and when she touched it gently, he gripped her fingers with desperate strength. "I know," she whispered. "I'm scared too, but we're going to figure this out together, okay? I won't let anything happen to you." For the rest of the night, she found herself jumping at every sound, wondering if Veronica was listening from the hallway. The easy comfort she'd found in this room was gone, replaced by a growing sense of danger that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the mansion. As dawn approached, Charles's communication became more urgent. Using their simple system, he managed to convey something that made Maria's blood run cold. Veronica had been there the night of his accident. She had been the last person to see him before he fell down the stairs, and now she was the only thing standing between him and the outside world. Maria realized she wasn't just caring for a coma patient anymore. She was protecting a man whose life might depend on her silence, even as that same silence might be killing him. The storm that had been brewing over Savannah for 3 days finally broke on a Thursday evening in November, sending sheets of rain against the mansion's windows and rattling the old oak trees that surrounded the estate. Maria arrived for her shift soaked to the bone, her umbrella having given up the fight against the wind somewhere between the bus stop and the front gate. She should have known it was an omen. "Miss Cruz." Veronica's voice stopped her before she could even reach the stairs. "My office now." The study was a monument to old money and older power, leather-bound books that looked like they'd never been opened, hunting trophies from safaris that spoke of casual cruelty, and behind the massive mahogany desk, Veronica sat like a queen holding court. On the desk before her lay a manila folder, thick with papers. "Sit down," Veronica commanded, not looking up from whatever she was reading. Maria perched on the edge of the chair, water from her damp clothes seeping into the expensive fabric. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "When trouble comes knocking, stand tall and face it with dignity." "I've been doing some research," Veronica finally said, opening the folder and spreading its contents across the desk like accusations. Very interesting what one can discover about a person when one knows where to look. Maria's stomach dropped as she recognized copies of documents she thought were private, immigration papers, employment records, her brother's school enrollment forms, even her grandmother's medical files. "Your grandmother Eleanor Cruz, age 73, admitted to Savannah General 6 times in the past year for complications related to diabetes. Quite expensive, I imagine. Your brother Diego, 17, honor roll student at Savannah High School, college applications pending. Bright boy. Pity about his family's circumstances. Those are private documents," Maria managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Privacy is a luxury for people who can afford it. Veronica's smile was sharp as broken glass. Now, let's discuss why your presence here has become problematic. She pulled out another set of papers, copies of Charles's medical charts, with certain entries highlighted in yellow. It seems Mr. Whitman's vital signs have been showing unusual patterns during your shifts. Heart rate, variability, changes in breathing patterns, even some reports of minor muscular responses. Veronica's eyes narrowed. Dr. Morrison initially dismissed these as equipment malfunctions or normal reflexive actions, but I've been monitoring the situation more closely. Maria felt the walls closing in around her. I don't understand what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Veronica stood and moved around the desk, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown. Last night, our security system recorded some very interesting audio from Mr. Whitman's room. Would you like to hear it? She pressed a button on a small device, and Maria's own voice filled the room. Charles, I know you're fighting to come back. I can feel it, but I'm starting to worry about what's waiting for you when you do. The recording continued, capturing every whispered word, every moment of the communication they'd developed together. Maria watched in horror. As her secret conversations were laid bare, twisted into something that sounded unprofessional at best, delusional at worst. You've been engaging in inappropriate contact with a vulnerable patient, Veronica continued, speaking to him as if he could respond, creating false documentation of improvements that don't exist. This is either severe professional misconduct or a complete break from reality. He can hear me, Maria said, desperation making her voice crack. He's been responding, communicating. A comatose patient with severe brain trauma doesn't communicate, Miss Cruz. What you've been experiencing is called projection, imposing your own hopes and needs onto an unresponsive patient. It's a sign of severe emotional instability. Veronica returned to her desk and pulled out one final document, a letter of termination already prepared, needing only Maria's signature to acknowledge she understood the terms. You're being dismissed immediately for patient abuse and unprofessional conduct. These are serious allegations that would prevent you from working in healthcare anywhere in the state of Georgia. However, her pause felt calculated, predatory. I'm prepared to keep this matter private if you sign this document acknowledging your misconduct and agreeing never to seek employment in a medical capacity again. And if I don't sign, then I file a formal complaint with the state health department. Social Services investigates. Your family's immigration status and your brother's college prospects disappear along with any chance your grandmother has of receiving subsidized medical care. Veronica's smile never wavered. Your choice. The rain continued to pound against the windows as Maria stared at the papers before her. Every option led to disaster. For her family, for Charles, for any hope of justice. Her hands shook as she reached for the pen. Just so we understand each other completely, Veronica added. You're never to contact this family again. No attempts to reach Mr. Whitman. No communication with his medical team. No sharing of your delusions with anyone. If you violate these terms, the consequences will be swift and severe. Maria signed her name, each letter feeling like a betrayal of everything she'd come to believe about Charles's condition. As she set down the pen, she felt something inside her break. Not just her heart, but her faith in a world where the truth mattered. Security will escort you out, Veronica said, pressing a button on her desk. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your address. Two uniformed guards appeared in the doorway, their presence making it clear that she was no longer welcome in the only place where she'd felt like she was making a real difference. As she was led through the mansion one last time, Maria caught a glimpse of Charles's room through the partially open door. Even from the hallway, she could see his still form, on the bed surrounded by machines that would continue their vigilant watch without her. I'm sorry, she whispered, too quietly for anyone else to hear. I'm so sorry I failed you. The front door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the storm, and Maria found herself alone in the rain, wondering if she'd just sentenced a good man to death to save her family from destruction. The eviction notice was bright orange, impossible to ignore, taped to the door of their small apartment like a neon sign announcing failure. Maria stared at it for a full minute before her shaking hands could tear it free, crumpling the paper against her chest as she fumbled for her keys. 2 weeks. That's how long it had been since Veronica had destroyed her world with surgical precision. 2 weeks since she'd lost the best-paying job she'd ever had, and 2 weeks of watching her carefully constructed life collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Abuela?" she called softly as she entered the apartment, but the only response was the labored breathing coming from the bedroom where her grandmother lay, growing weaker by the day without the medications they could no longer afford. Diego looked up from the kitchen table where he sat surrounded by college brochures and financial aid forms that now seemed like mockery. At 17, he was trying to be the man of the house, but Maria could see the fear in his dark eyes that matched her own. "The pharmacy called again," he said quietly. "About Abuela's insulin, they said—" "I know what they said." Maria sank into the chair across from him, the eviction notice still clutched in her fist. "I'll figure something out." But the words felt hollow, even as she spoke them. The diner had cut her hours after she'd been late 3 times in 2 weeks, the exhaustion of working double shifts and caring for her grandmother finally catching up with her. Her other cleaning job had dried up. When word somehow got around about her dismissal for misconduct from the Whitman estate. In this small city, reputation mattered, and somehow, despite Veronica's promise to keep things quiet, whispers had spread through the network of domestic workers like poison in the water supply. "There's something else," Diego said, his voice barely above a whisper. He slid a letter across the table, official letterhead from his high school. "They're saying if I can't provide proof of stable housing by next month, they'll have to transfer me to the alternative school, and without a stable address—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but they both knew what it meant. His carefully maintained GPA, his college prospects, his dreams, all of it would disappear. Maria read the letter twice, each word hitting her like a physical blow. The apartment they'd called home for 3 years, Diego's school, her grandmother's care. Everything was slipping through her fingers like sand. "It's my fault," she whispered. "I should have kept quiet. Should have just done my job and nothing more." But even as she said it, she thought of Charles lying helpless in that bed, aware and afraid, with no one to advocate for him. Had she condemned him to save her family? Or had she condemned her family for nothing? That night, as her grandmother slept fitfully and Diego pretended to do homework while actually researching part-time jobs for teenagers, Maria found herself walking through the historic district where she'd once felt hopeful about the future. The mansion loomed in the distance, its windows glowing warm against the night sky, and she wondered if Charles was still trying to communicate with the new night aide, or if he'd given up hope entirely. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard about your situation. Might have work for you. Nothing fancy, but cash and no questions asked. Meet me at Forsyth Park tomorrow at noon. A friend." Maria stared at the message, torn between desperation and suspicion. In her current situation, even questionable opportunities looked like lifelines. But her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Mia, when someone offers easy money with no questions, the questions you should ask are about your own soul." The next morning brought news that drove her closer to the edge. The hospital called to say her grandmother's condition was deteriorating faster than expected, and without immediate adjustments to her treatment plan, they couldn't guarantee her stability for much longer. "How much?" Maria asked, though she already knew the answer would be impossible. "The medication alone would run about $800 a month," the social worker explained. "There are programs for families in financial distress, but the waiting list is extensive, and given your current employment situation—" Maria hung up before she could hear the rest. $800. Might as well have been $8 million. She had $37 in her checking account, and a grandmother who was dying because she'd chosen to care about a man who might not even remember her existence. The meeting at Forsyth Park turned out to be with a woman she recognized from the restaurant where she'd briefly worked bussing tables. Sandra, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, who always seemed to have money despite no visible means of employment. "I heard Veronica Hale's screwed." "You over?" Sandra said without preamble, settling onto the park bench beside Maria. "She's got a reputation for that. Destroys people who get too close to her business." "What kind of work are you offering?" Maria asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. "Rich people have secrets they pay to keep quiet. Sometimes they need someone to deliver messages, make pickups, handle things that can't have paper trails." Sandra's expression was matter of fact. "It's not illegal, but it's not exactly legal either. 500 a week, cash, and nobody asks where you've been. Maria thought of her grandmother's labored breathing, Diego's college applications, the eviction notice burning a hole in her purse. $500 would solve their immediate crisis, buy her time to find legitimate work, keep her family together. I need to think about it, she said finally. Don't think too long, Sandra replied, standing to leave. People in our situation don't get many chances, and pride is a luxury we can't afford. That evening, as Maria sat beside her grandmother's bed listening to her struggle for each breath, she realized she'd reached the moment that defines a person's life, the choice between who you are and who you might become when everything you love hangs in the balance. The photograph of Charles that she'd somehow kept, despite everything, sat on her dresser, a reminder of a man who'd trusted her with his secret and whom she'd failed when it mattered most. Tomorrow she would have to decide who she really was. The coffee shop on Bull Street was the kind of place where locals gathered to exchange gossip over sweet tea and biscuits. Maria had been nursing the same cup of coffee for an hour, waiting for Sandra to arrive with details about the job that promised to solve all her problems, when she overheard a conversation that changed everything. I'm telling you, something's not right with that whole situation, said a voice she recognized as belonging to Mrs. Patterson, the day nurse who'd worked at the Whitman estate. 30 years in nursing, and I've never seen anything like it. Maria's attention snapped to focus as Mrs. Patterson continued speaking to her companion, a younger woman Maria didn't recognize. The poor man's been in that coma for almost a year now, and that fiancée of his acts like she's already measuring the curtains for redecorating. Gives me the chills, the way she looks at him sometimes. What do you mean? The younger woman asked. Mrs. Patterson lowered her voice, but Maria, seated one table over, could still hear every word. Last week, I came in early and heard her on the phone with the lawyers again. Something about life insurance policies and medical power of attorney, and the strangest thing, she keeps adjusting his medication levels without consulting Dr. Morrison. Maria's blood ran cold. Adjusting his medications how? The question slipped out before she could stop herself, and both women turned to look at her. Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened with recognition. Maria, dear, I heard about what happened. Such a shame. You were so good with Mr. Whitman. Her expression grew concerned. Are you doing all right, honey? You look like you haven't been sleeping. I'm fine, Maria lied, then lowered her voice. Mrs. Patterson, what you were saying about the medications. Oh, I probably shouldn't have said anything. The older nurse glanced around nervously. It's just that I've been doing this long enough to recognize when something feels wrong. That young woman, she keeps insisting on handling his evening medications herself, says she wants to be involved in his care. But the doses she's giving him, she shook her head. Let's just say they're not what Dr. Morrison prescribed. What kind of medications? Sedatives, mostly. Supposed to help with agitation, but Mr. Whitman's never shown signs of agitation. If anything, those doses would keep someone from waking up even if their brain was ready to. The implications hit Maria like a physical blow. If Charles was truly responsive, if he was fighting to wake up, and Veronica was deliberately keeping him sedated. Mrs. Patterson, Maria said carefully, hypothetically, if someone were overdosing a coma patient with sedatives, what would that look like? The nurse's expression grew grave. Slower recovery, suppressed neurological function, possible permanent damage if it went on long enough. Why would you ask such a thing? Before Maria could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. Running late. Meet me at my car instead. Black SUV parked behind the coffee shop. Maria stood abruptly, her mind racing. Mrs. Patterson, do you still have copies of Mr. Whitman's original medication orders, the ones Dr. Morrison actually prescribed? Well, yes, in my nursing bag. But Maria, what's this about? I think Mr. Whitman might be in serious danger, and I think I know how to prove it. 20 minutes later, Maria sat in Sandra's SUV with photocopies of Charles's legitimate medication orders in her hands, comparing them to what Mrs. Patterson had observed Veronica administering. The differences were staggering. Dosages 3 times higher than prescribed, medications that had never been ordered by his doctor, sedatives powerful enough to keep an elephant unconscious. This is attempted murder, Maria breathed. Sandra, who had been surprisingly supportive when Maria explained the situation, nodded grimly. Question is, what are you going to do about it? You go to the police. It's your word against hers. You're a fired maid with no proof except stolen medical records. There has to be something. There is. Sandra's expression was thoughtful. That security system she used to record you works both ways. If she's been having private conversations about this, if she's been giving him unauthorized medications, it's all on tape. Maria stared at her. You're talking about breaking into the mansion. I'm talking about getting evidence of a crime. The security office is in the basement. I did some work there a few years back. Simple keypad system, and I still know the code. Sandra's smile was grim. Besides, someone needs to check on your Mr. Whitman. If she's really drugging him into permanent unconsciousness. The thought of Charles lying helpless while Veronica slowly poisoned him made Maria's decision for her. When? Tonight. Veronica has a standing appointment every Thursday evening, some charity board meeting downtown. She'll be gone for hours. Sandra started the engine. But Maria, if we do this, there's no going back. If we get caught, it's breaking and entering at minimum. Your family situation will be the least of your problems. Maria thought of her grandmother fighting for each breath, Diego's college dreams hanging by a thread, the eviction notice that gave them less than 10 days to find a new place to live. Then she thought of Charles, aware and afraid, slowly slipping away while his would-be murderer planned her future with his money. Let's go save him, she said. As they drove toward the mansion, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope, not for her own situation. That was still a disaster, but for Charles, and for the truth that had been buried under layers of lies and manipulation. Tonight, one way or another, the truth would come to light. The storm clouds gathering over Savannah seemed to mirror the tension building in Maria's chest as they approached the estate where everything had started to unravel. But this time, she wasn't walking into the unknown as a naive young woman grateful for any opportunity. This time, she was walking in as someone who knew exactly what was at stake and who was willing to risk everything to make things right. The basement of the Whitman mansion smelled of old money and older secrets, leather and brass polish, with an underlying current of something that reminded Maria of hospitals. Sandra's fingers flew over the security keypad with practiced confidence, and within moments, they were staring at a wall of monitors displaying every room in the house. There, Sandra whispered, pointing to a screen showing Charles's room. In the green glow of night vision, they could see his still form on the bed, monitors blinking steadily around him. More importantly, they could see Veronica standing beside his bed with a syringe in her hand. She's drugging him right now, Maria breathed, horror and rage warring in her chest. They watched in silence as Veronica injected something into Charles's IV line, then stood for a moment looking down at him with an expression Maria couldn't quite read. Satisfaction, impatience. When Veronica finally left the room, Maria was already moving toward the stairs. "Wait!" Sandra hissed. "We need to copy the security footage first. He could be dying right now," Maria shot back. "I'm not leaving him alone with whatever she just gave him." The mansion felt different in the darkness. Larger somehow, full of shadows that seemed to move with malevolent purpose. Maria's heart pounded as she crept up the servants' stairs, every creak of the old wood sounding like gunshots in the silence. Charles's room was exactly as she remembered, but seeing him again after 2 weeks away hit her like a physical blow. He looked smaller somehow, more fragile, as if the weeks of Veronica's care had been slowly draining the life from him. "Charles," she whispered, moving to his bedside, "I'm here. I'm so sorry I left you." His skin was cold to the touch, colder than it should have been, and his breathing was so shallow she had to lean close to his chest to make sure he was still alive. Whatever Veronica had injected was working fast. Working on instinct and desperation, Maria began the gentle massage techniques the physical therapist had taught her, trying to stimulate circulation and neural response. She talked to him constantly, her voice growing more urgent as she watched his vital signs on the monitors. "Don't you give up on me now, Charles Whitman. Don't you dare let her win." For long minutes, there was no response. His heart rate continued to drop. His breathing remained dangerously shallow, and Maria began to panic. Had she arrived too late? Had weeks of systematic drugging finally pushed his system beyond recovery? Then, so faintly she almost missed it, she felt it, a tremor in his hand, the barest pressure against her palm. "That's it," she encouraged, tears streaming down her face. "Fight it, Charles. Whatever she gave you, fight it. Gradually, over the course of an hour, his responses grew stronger. The squeeze of his fingers became more definite. His breathing deepened, and most remarkably his eyes began to move beneath his closed lids as if he was trying to wake up. "Can you open your eyes?" Maria asked softly. Even for just a moment. It was the hardest thing she'd ever watched, the visible struggle as Charles fought against the sedatives in his system, every small movement requiring enormous effort. But slowly, impossibly, his eyelids fluttered open. For the first time in nearly a year, Charles Whitman looked directly at Maria Cruz, and she saw in his gaze not just consciousness but recognition, gratitude, and something that looked remarkably like love. "Maria," he whispered, his voice barely audible but unmistakably clear. "Oh my God," she sobbed, gripping his hand tightly. "You're really awake. You can see me." "Been trying." Each word was a struggle, but his eyes remained focused on her face. "She's been poisoning." "I know," Maria said quickly. "We have proof. We're going to stop her." Charles managed to nod slightly, then his expression grew urgent. "Have to tell you. Remember everything." "What do you remember?" The knight fell downstairs. His breathing was labored, but his determination was fierce. "Wasn't accident," she pushed. The words hit Maria like ice water. Murder. Not just attempted murder through systematic drugging, but deliberate, calculated murder that had only failed because Charles's skull was harder than Veronica had counted on. "Charles, we need to get you help. Real medical help, not whatever she's been giving you. Can't trust anyone. She pays." He squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "Only trust you." Before Maria could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Charles's eyes widened with fear, and he gripped her hand desperately. "Hide," he mouthed silently. Maria barely had time to slip behind the heavy curtains before Veronica entered the room, and what she heard made her blood run cold. Well, Veronica's voice was soft, almost conversational. "Someone's been busy tonight. Did you really think I wouldn't notice that someone accessed the security system?" There was a long pause. Then Veronica continued, and Maria realized with horror that she was talking directly to Charles. "Yes, darling, I know you're awake. I've known for weeks. Did you think I was blind to the little improvements during that maid's shifts? The way your vitals changed? When she was here." Another pause, then Veronica's voice turned cold as winter wind. "The question is, what am I going to do about it? I've come too far to let a sentimental fool and a poverty-stricken maid ruin everything I've worked for." Maria heard the clink of glass on metal and knew Veronica was preparing another injection, possibly a fatal one this time. "This ends tonight, Charles, one way or another." From her hiding place behind the curtains, Maria had to make a choice that would determine whether Charles lived or died in the next few minutes. And this time, she wasn't going to let fear or consequences stop her from doing what was right. She stepped out from behind the curtains, her phone already recording everything. "Yes, it does end tonight," she said firmly, "but not the way you planned." The confrontation in Charles's room that night lasted only minutes, but those minutes changed everything. Veronica's face had gone white when she realized Maria was recording her confession, and the syringe full of what would later be identified as a lethal dose of morphine clattered to the floor as she lunged for the phone. But Sandra had called the police from the security office, and Veronica Hale was arrested before she could destroy the evidence that would ultimately convict her of attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Now, 3 weeks later, Maria sat beside Charles's bed in Savannah General Hospital, watching him work with the physical therapist to regain the strength that months of systematic drugging had stolen from him. The progress was remarkable. Dr. Morrison had said it was like watching someone come back from the dead. "The neurological function is extraordinary," the doctor had explained to the assembled crowd of genuine medical professionals, police officers, and reporters who had swarmed the case once the truth came out. "Mr. Whitman's cognitive abilities appear completely intact. If Miss Cruz hadn't intervened when she did, he hadn't needed to finish the sentence. Everyone understood how close Charles had come to permanent damage or death." "Try again," the physical therapist encouraged as Charles worked to lift his arm above his head. The movement that should have been simple was still a struggle, but his determination was fierce. "I'm fine," Charles said, though sweat beaded on his forehead from the effort. "Maria, tell her I'm fine." You're stubborn, Maria corrected with a smile. There's a difference. Over the past weeks, as Charles regained his strength and the legal proceedings against Veronica moved forward, Maria had found herself in an impossible position. The press had dubbed her the angel maid who saved the millionaire. And while the attention was flattering, it was also overwhelming for someone who had always preferred to work quietly behind the scenes. More challenging was navigating her feelings for Charles himself. What had started as professional compassion had grown into something deeper during their secret communications, and now that he was awake and grateful, and looking at her with eyes that held more than friendship, she didn't know how to respond. "Miss Cruz?" A voice from the doorway interrupted her thoughts. A young woman in a business suit stood there looking nervous but determined. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about—" "No? Interviews," Charles said firmly from his bed. "I've told everyone Maria's privacy is off limits. But Mr. Whitman, the public is interested in her story. A woman from such humble circumstances who risked everything to save—" "A woman who deserves to have her life back," Charles interrupted. "The answer is no." After the reporter left, Maria turned to Charles with a frown. "You can't protect me from the whole world, you know. And I can speak for myself. I know you can. I've seen exactly how strong you are." His expression grew serious. "But you've already sacrificed enough because of me. Your job, your family's security, your peace of mind. I won't let anyone exploit what you've been through." It was true that the past month had been overwhelming, but it hadn't been all sacrifice. Charles had insisted on covering her grandmother's medical expenses, and Elena was responding well to the treatment she could finally afford. Diego had received a college scholarship, one that Charles swore he had nothing to do with, though Maria suspected otherwise. Their new apartment in a better neighborhood was temporary housing, according to Charles, though the lease was in Maria's name. "There's something I need to tell you," Charles said suddenly, his voice taking on the serious tone that meant he'd been thinking about something for a while. "What?" "I've been thinking about what to do with the estate. That house, all those rooms, sitting empty, while people in this city struggle to find decent housing." He paused, studying her face. "I want to turn it into something useful. A community center, maybe, or transitional housing for families in crisis." Maria's breath caught. It was such a perfect idea, so completely in character for the man she'd come to know through their whispered conversations and shared struggles. "That's wonderful, Charles. But what will you do? Where will you live?" "I was hoping," he said carefully, "that you might help me figure that out." The words hung between them, loaded with possibilities that both excited and terrified her. Maria had grown up believing that people like her didn't get fairy tale endings, that the rich and poor lived in separate worlds that occasionally touched but never truly merged. But looking at Charles now, not the unconscious patient she'd cared for, but the man who had fought his way back to consciousness and was choosing to use his second chance at life to help others, she began to wonder if maybe the rules were different when the foundation was built on genuine care and mutual respect. "Your grandmother wants to meet me," Charles said with a smile. "Diego invited me to his next basketball game, and I was thinking—" He reached for her hand, the same gesture that had started their communication when he couldn't speak. "I was thinking that maybe we could start over. No employer and employee, no millionaire and maid. Just Charles and Maria figuring out what comes next." "And what do you think comes next?" Maria asked, her heart racing despite herself. "I think," Charles said, his thumb tracing that familiar circle on her palm, "that the best stories begin when two people who seem to have nothing in common discover they have everything that matters in common." Outside the hospital windows, Savannah basked in the golden light of a late autumn afternoon, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, Maria allowed herself to believe that sometimes, just sometimes, love really could conquer everything, even the impossible distance between two worlds that had somehow found their way to each other through tears, truth, and the kind of courage that only comes from caring more about someone else's life than your own comfort. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in December, delivered in the form of a process server who found Maria leaving her new apartment building. The official papers accused her of extortion, fraud, and exploiting a vulnerable patient for financial gain. The plaintiff was Veronica Hale, and the lawsuit demanded $2 million in damages. "This is insane," Maria told Charles when she arrived at his physical therapy session. Her hands shook as she handed him the legal documents. She's the one sitting in jail awaiting trial for attempted murder, and somehow she's suing me? Charles read through the papers, his jaw tightening with each page. Her lawyers are trying to get ahead of the criminal trial. If they can paint you as an opportunist who manipulated a confused patient, it undermines the prosecution's case against her. But it's all lies, Maria protested. Every word of it. Lies can be very powerful when they're told by expensive lawyers to people who want to believe them, Charles said grimly. He was quiet for a moment, then looked up at her with concern. Maria, there's something else. I got a call from my business manager this morning. Someone's been spreading rumors about us in the financial community, questions about my mental competency, suggestions that I'm being manipulated. The implications hit Maria like a cold wave. If Charles's business partners and investors began to doubt his judgment, it could affect everything. His companies, his ability to help her family, even the community center project that had become so important to both of them. That afternoon, the attacks escalated. A tabloid newspaper ran a front-page story with the headline, "Gold Diggers Scheme, How a Maid Fooled a Millionaire," complete with unflattering photos of Maria taken outside the courthouse during Veronica's arraignment. The article painted her as a calculating woman who had taken advantage of a confused patient's gratitude, twisting their genuine connection into something sordid and manipulative. "Look at this," Diego said angrily, tossing the newspaper onto the kitchen table where Maria sat with her grandmother. "They're saying you seduced him while he was unconscious. It's disgusting." Elena Cruz looked up from her knitting, her wise eyes taking in her granddaughter's defeated expression. "Mija, in my 73 years, I've learned that people who tell lies about good people usually do it because the truth threatens something they want to protect. But what if Charles starts to believe it?" Maria whispered. "What if he starts to wonder if I really did manipulate him? Then he's not the man you think he is," her grandmother said simply, "and you'll know you're better off without him." But the doubt had been planted, and over the next few days, Maria found herself second-guessing every interaction she'd had with Charles since he'd awakened. Had she encouraged his gratitude to grow into something more? Had she unconsciously manipulated him during his vulnerable state? The uncertainty was made worse by the fact that Charles himself seemed to be pulling away. His visits to her apartment became less frequent, their conversations more formal. When she asked if something was wrong, he assured her that nothing had changed, but his eyes didn't meet hers when he said it. The breaking point came during a strategy meeting with Charles's legal team. The lawyers had gathered to discuss how to counter Veronica's lawsuit and protect Charles's business interests, but their advice was devastating. "Mr. Whitman," the lead attorney said carefully, "we strongly recommend that you distance yourself from Miss Cruz, at least publicly, until this matter is resolved. The relationship is being used to question your judgment and competency." "That's ridiculous," Charles protested. "Maria saved my life. We understand that, and we're not disputing her heroism. But perception matters, especially in civil court. A poor maid who ends up romantically involved with the wealthy patient she cared for, it doesn't look good, regardless of the actual circumstances." Maria felt as if she was watching her world collapse for the second time in as many months. "Maybe they're right," she said quietly. "Maybe I should step back." "No," Charles said firmly. "I won't let them do this to us. To you." But later that evening, when they were alone, the pressure seemed to have taken its toll on him too. "Maria," he said carefully, "maybe we should consider slowing things down, just until the legal issues are resolved." "Slowing things down," she repeated. "Is that what you want or what your lawyers want?" "I want to protect you. If being connected to me is putting you and your family at risk—" "Don't," Maria interrupted, standing up from the hospital chair where she'd been sitting. "Don't make this about protecting me when it's really about protecting yourself. That's not fair, isn't it? The moment things get difficult, the moment your precious reputation is threatened, suddenly I'm someone you need to distance yourself from." Her voice broke slightly. "Maybe Veronica was right about one thing. People like us don't belong in people like your world." "Maria, please," but she was already gathering her things, tears blurring her vision. "I should have known better. Fairy tales don't happen to maids from the wrong side of town." As she walked out of Charles's hospital room, Maria felt the familiar sting of betrayal, not just from him, but from herself for believing. That love could bridge the gap between their worlds. Behind her, she could hear Charles calling her name, but she didn't turn around. Outside, the December air was sharp and cold, cutting through her jacket and reminding her that winter was coming whether she was ready for it or not. The tabloid newspaper's words echoed in her mind. Gold digger's scheme. Maybe that's all she would ever be to the world that Charles lived in. A poor girl who had reached too high and been reminded of her place. But as she walked home through the streets of Savannah, past the grand mansions and historic squares that had once seemed like fairy tale settings, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She was done running from the truth, and she was done letting other people define who she was. If Veronica Hale wanted a fight, she was about to get one. The Savannah Morning News investigative reporter Sarah Chen had been following the Whitman case since Veronica's arrest, but it wasn't until she received an anonymous tip about financial irregularities that the real story began to emerge. The tip led her to Mrs. Patterson, the day nurse, who had been quietly documenting her concerns about Charles's care long before Maria had ever been hired. "I kept copies of everything," Mrs. Patterson told Sarah during their interview at a quiet cafe downtown. "Medical charts showing unauthorized medication changes, phone calls I overheard about insurance policies, even photographs of Miss Hale administering injections that weren't prescribed by any doctor." The evidence Mrs. Patterson had collected painted a devastating picture of systematic patient abuse that went far beyond what even the prosecutors had suspected. But more importantly for Maria's situation, it established a timeline that proved she had nothing to do with Veronica's schemes. "Miss Cruz was trying to help Mr. Whitman, not exploit him," Mrs. Patterson continued. "I saw how she cared. For him, how gently she spoke to him. If anyone was manipulating that poor man, it was the woman who's now sitting in jail." Sarah's investigation didn't stop there. She discovered that Veronica had been in significant debt before her engagement to Charles, gambling debts that provided a clear motive for murder. She found witnesses who had seen Veronica arguing with Charles on the night of his accident, and security footage from a nearby building that showed her leaving the mansion, at a time that contradicted her original police statement. Most damaging of all, she uncovered evidence that Veronica's legal team was being funded by offshore accounts linked to organized crime, the same people to whom Veronica owed money. "This isn't just about attempted murder," Sarah explained to Maria when they met to discuss the article she was preparing. "This is about a criminal conspiracy that was willing to destroy anyone who threatened their plan to steal Charles Whitman's fortune." The story broke on a Wednesday morning with a headline that read, "Criminal Conspiracy: How Organized Crime Targeted Tech Millionaire Through Fake Fiancée." The article methodically dismantled every lie that had been told about Maria, revealing her as the hero who had uncovered and stopped a sophisticated murder plot. But the most powerful part of the story came from an unexpected source, Charles himself, who had finally decided to speak publicly about what had really happened. "Maria Cruz saved my life in every way that matters," he told Sarah Chen in an exclusive interview. "She didn't manipulate me. She rescued me from someone who was slowly killing me while pretending to love me. The idea that she was motivated by money is not just false, it's insulting to one of the most genuinely caring people I've ever known." Charles went on to detail the entire timeline of his relationship with both women, making it clear that his feelings for Maria had developed through their authentic connection, not through any manipulation on her part. "When I was trapped in my own body, unable to speak or move, Maria was the only person who treated me like a human being instead of a problem to be managed," he said. "She talked to me, sang to me, held my hand when I was frightened. She saw me when everyone else just saw a medical case." The article's publication created a firestorm of public support for Maria. The mayor of Savannah issued a statement praising her courage, and several women's rights organizations declared her a symbol of how working-class women are often vilified when they dare to speak truth to power. But the most meaningful response came from Charles himself, who showed up at Maria's apartment the morning the article was published, carrying a copy of the newspaper and a dozen yellow roses. "I owe you an apology," he said when she opened the door. A huge one. Maria had been expecting this moment, but she found herself unprepared for the mixture of emotions that seeing him stirred up. Love, anger, hurt, and hope all tangled together in her chest. "Come in," she said quietly. They sat at her grandmother's kitchen table, the same one where she'd faced the eviction notice just months earlier, and Charles struggled to find the words to explain his behavior. "I was scared," he finally admitted. "Not of the lawsuit or the bad publicity, but of losing you. When my lawyers said that being with me was putting you in danger, I thought if I pulled away I could protect you from all of this. So you decided what was best for me without asking me," Maria said. "Yes, and I was wrong." He reached across the table to take her hand, the same gesture that had been their first real communication. "I was so afraid of you getting hurt because of me that I hurt you myself." "Charles," Maria said carefully, "I need to know that this is real. Not gratitude, not guilt, not some kind of rescue complex. I need to know that you see me as an equal, not as someone you need to protect or save. I see you as the strongest person I know," he said. "Someone who risked everything to do what was right, even when it would have been easier to look the other way. Someone who taught me that courage isn't about money or power. It's about caring more about doing the right thing than about protecting yourself." He paused, studying her face. "I love you, Maria. Not because you saved my life, but because of who you are. Because you make me want to be a better man than I was before. And I love you," she said, finally allowing herself to say the words that had been in her heart for months. "But if we're going to make this work, it has to be as partners. No more making decisions for me to protect me." "Partners," Charles agreed, bringing her hand to his lips. "In everything." Outside the kitchen window, Savannah sparkled in the winter sunshine, and Maria realized that sometimes the best love stories are the ones where both people have to learn how to be worthy of each other. "So what happens now?" she asked. Charles smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she'd seen from him in weeks. "Now we show them all how this story really ends." The courtroom was packed on the day of Veronica Hale's sentencing. Maria sat in the front row beside Charles, their hands intertwined as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict that would close this chapter of their lives forever. Behind them, the gallery was filled with supporters. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah Chen, several nurses who had worked at the estate, and dozens of people from the community who had followed the story. "The defendant will rise," Judge Rebecca Harrison announced, her voice carrying the weight of finality. Veronica stood beside her lawyer, her designer clothing and perfect posture unable to hide the defeat in her eyes. The woman who had once commanded the Whitman mansion with imperial authority now looked small and diminished, her carefully constructed facade finally stripped away. "Veronica Hale," the judge continued, "you have been found guilty of attempted murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and patient abuse. The evidence presented in this case reveals a pattern of calculated cruelty that shocks the conscience of this court." Judge Harrison's voice grew harder as she detailed the crimes. "You systematically poisoned a helpless man while pretending to love him. You destroyed the reputation of the woman who saved his life. You conspired with criminal organizations to steal a fortune that was never yours to claim." The judge paused, looking directly at Veronica. "Your actions represent the worst kind of betrayal, the abuse of trust by someone in a position of power over a vulnerable person. The sentence of this court is 30 years in state prison without possibility of parole." A collective exhale seemed to fill the courtroom as justice was finally served. Maria felt Charles squeeze her hand tighter, and she realized that some part of her hadn't truly believed this moment would come. For so long it had seemed like Veronica's wealth and connections would somehow allow her to escape consequences. But there was one more surprise waiting. "Before we adjourn," Judge Harrison said, "the court would like to acknowledge Miss Maria Cruz, whose courage in coming forward prevented what would certainly have been a murder. Miss Cruz, would you please stand?" Maria rose on shaking legs, completely unprepared for public recognition. The judge's expression softened as she looked at the young woman who had risked everything to save a stranger. "In 30 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such clear moral courage," Judge Harrison said. "You acted not for personal gain, but because it was the right thing to do. You are a credit to this community and an inspiration to us all." The courtroom erupted in applause, and Maria felt tears streaming down her face as she realized that the nightmare was truly over. Veronica Hale would spend the rest of her life in prison, and the truth about what had really happened was now part of the public record. 6 months later, the transformation of the Whitman estate into the Cruz Family Community Center was complete. The mansion that had once been a symbol of isolation and wealth had become a beacon of hope for families in crisis, offering everything from job training programs to childcare services to free medical clinics. "It's perfect," Maria said, as she and Charles walked through the main hall, which had been converted into a gathering space where children played while their parents attended classes or meetings. "It's what it should have been all along," Charles replied, "a place where people help each other instead of a monument to one person's ego." They had been married in the garden behind the center 3 months earlier, in a ceremony that reflected their values rather than society's expectations. Elena had walked Maria down the aisle, Diego had served as the ring-bearer, and Mrs. Patterson had done the honor of officiating the ceremony as a licensed minister. "Mrs. Whitman," Charles said, still enjoying the sound of her new name, "there's something I want to show you." He led her to what had once been Veronica's office, now transformed into a memorial room dedicated to Maria's grandmother, who had passed peacefully in her sleep 2 months after the wedding. The walls were covered with photographs of Elena Cruz's life, her childhood in El Salvador, her immigration to America, her years of hard work that had made Diego and Maria's education possible. "She would have loved this," Maria said softly, touching a photograph of her grandmother, teaching her to cook in their tiny apartment kitchen. "She would have been proud of you," Charles corrected, "just like I am every single day." They were interrupted by the sound of children's laughter from the main hall, where Diego was leading a group of teenagers in a basketball game. At 19, he was a sophomore at Savannah State University on a full academic scholarship, studying to become a social worker so he could help other families navigate the systems that had once seemed so overwhelming. "You know," Maria said, watching her brother through the window, "sometimes I can't believe this is really our life." "Believe it," Charles said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "We earned it." As the sun set over Savannah, casting golden light through the windows of the community center, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she had been a struggling maid with an uncertain future. Now she was the director of a non-profit organization that was making a real difference in people's lives, married to a man who saw her as an equal partner in everything they did. But more than the external changes, she had discovered something about herself that no amount of money could buy. The knowledge that she had the courage to do what was right, even when it cost her everything she thought she wanted. "What are you thinking about?" Charles asked. "Just how everything that seemed like the worst thing that could happen actually led to the best thing that could happen," she said. "If Veronica hadn't fired me, if I hadn't hit rock bottom, maybe I never would have found the courage to fight back." "Maybe," Charles agreed. "Or maybe you always had that courage. You just needed the right reason to use it." As they prepared to lock up the center for the evening, Maria looked one more time at her grandmother's memorial wall, where Elena's favorite saying was displayed in elegant script: "La verdad siempre encuentra su camino." The truth always finds its way. It had taken time, and it had cost them both more than they'd expected to pay, but in the end, Elena had been right. The truth had found its way. 5 years later, Maria stood on the stage of the Savannah Convention Center, looking out at an audience of social workers, healthcare advocates, and policymakers who had gathered for the annual Truth and Courage Conference, an event that had grown from a small local gathering to a nationally recognized forum for discussing patient rights and healthcare reform. "When I first walked into Charles Whitman's room 5 years ago," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, "I was just trying to keep a job that would pay my grandmother's medical bills. I never imagined that one decision to listen with my heart instead of following orders would change not just my life, but the lives of thousands of families across the country." The Cruz Family Community Center had become a model for other cities with similar facilities opening in Atlanta, Charleston, and Jacksonville. More importantly, Maria's story had inspired new legislation requiring independent oversight of long-term coma patients and protections for healthcare workers who report suspected abuse. "The Patient Advocacy Protection Act passed Congress last month," Maria continued, "and it exists because sometimes ordinary people have to do extraordinary things to make the world pay attention to injustice." In the audience, Charles watched his wife with the same expression of wonder he'd worn since the day she'd first touched his hand in that hospital bed. Next to him sat Dr. Elizabeth Reyes, the neurologist who had taken over his care after Dr. Morrison's retirement, and who had become both a friend and a crucial ally in their advocacy work. "You know," Dr. Reyes whispered to Charles. "In medical school, they teach us to maintain professional distance from patients. But watching Maria work, I've learned that sometimes the most healing thing you can do is see someone's full humanity." Also in the audience were Diego, now a licensed social worker running the youth programs at the center, and his fiancée Carmen, a teacher who had volunteered at the center and fallen in love with both the mission and Diego's passion for helping others. The family that had once struggled to survive was now a family dedicated to helping others thrive. But the real victory, Maria continued from the stage, isn't in the laws we've changed or the programs we've created. It's in every family that doesn't have to choose between rent and medicine. Every patient who knows someone is truly listening to their needs. Every young person who discovers they have the power to make a difference in the world. As she spoke, Maria's hand unconsciously moved to her slightly rounded belly, where she and Charles's first child was growing. They had decided to wait to share the news publicly, wanting to savor this private joy for a little while longer. "5 years ago, I thought courage meant keeping quiet and following rules," she said. "Now I know that real courage means speaking up when something is wrong, even when, especially when, no one wants to hear it." After the conference, the extended family gathered at the community center for their traditional Sunday dinner. Elena's recipes lived on in the kitchen, prepared now by a rotating group of volunteers who had learned to cook from Maria and Diego. The main dining room buzzed with conversation in English and Spanish as families from the neighborhood joined the Whitman Cruz clan for a meal that had grown from a small family tradition into a weekly celebration of community. "Tia Maria," called out Sophia, Diego and Carmen's 7-year-old daughter, whom they had adopted through the center's family services program, "will you tell us the story about how you saved Tio Charles?" Maria laughed, settling into a chair that had been her grandmother's favorite spot. "Again? You must know that story by heart by now." "But we like hearing it," insisted Miguel, another of the children who had found their way to the extended family through various circumstances. "It's like a fairy tale, but real." "It is real," Charles said, sitting beside Maria and taking her hand in the gesture that had become their signature. "And the best part is that it's not finished yet." As the evening wound down and the families began to head home, Maria and Charles walked through the center's halls, checking on the various programs that would continue throughout the week. The building that had once echoed with loneliness now hummed with life and purpose. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been fired that night?" Charles asked as they paused in front of Elena's memorial wall. "Sometimes," Maria admitted, "but then I realized that everything happened exactly as it needed to. The pain, the struggle, even the fear, it all led us here." They stopped in what had been Charles's original bedroom, now converted into a meditation and quiet space where families could find peace during difficult times. Through the windows, they could see the lights of Savannah twinkling in the distance, and Maria marveled at how the view that had once seemed like a glimpse into an unreachable world now felt like home. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking Charles's hands in both of hers. "What?" "Dr. Martinez called with the test results today. We're having a girl." Charles's face lit up with joy, and he lifted Maria off her feet, spinning her around in the room where their love story had begun. "A daughter," he said wonderingly. "What do you want to name her?" "Eleanor," Maria said without hesitation. "Eleanor Truth Whitman." "Perfect," Charles agreed, his eyes filling with tears. "Absolutely perfect." As they prepared to leave the center for the evening, Maria took one last look at the memorial wall where her grandmother's saying still held the place of honor. "La verdad siempre encuentra su camino." The truth had indeed found its way, not just in the courtroom where Veronica had been convicted, but in the love that had grown between two people from different worlds, in the family they had built together, and in the community they had created from the ashes of tragedy. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Whitman?" Charles asked. "I am home," Maria replied, looking around at the center that had become the beating heart of their shared mission. "We both are." And as they walked out into the Savannah evening, hand in hand, Maria knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning. "So tell me, what's your opinion about the power of speaking truth to power, even when it costs us everything? Did this story touch you in any way? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to read them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Hit that subscribe button to join us for more powerful stories about courage, love, and the triumph of the human spirit.